This is going to be Erin Little with Pipestone Research. Erin's been with Pipestone Research for 9 years, and she's been in the role of Director of Research Operations for 2.5 years. Erin lives near Brookings, South Dakota with her husband and 2 kids, Finn and Collins. And I learned it's a small world. We actually also went to the same high school, I learned, throughout this process, so which is a big feat because it's not a very big school. So with that, Erin's going to finish up the presentation today.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me all right? Good? Perfect. Yeah, thank you. So I'm going to be talking today about executing disease research at Pipestone specifically. There we go. So I've got 4 objectives for today, and I really appreciate Mike and Dwight's talk. I'm going to echo a lot of that and then hopefully add some more details specifically around our disease research that we do at Pipestone. And so I'm going to start with why we, at Pipestone specifically, why we invest in intentional disease models. Share some of our experiences on multiple challenge models, and then I've got 5 priorities that I really want to drive home for us when executing these challenge models. And then I just have a little bit on the future of swine disease research and where I see it both for Pipestone and the industry as a whole. And so I really loved the idea filter that Dwight talked about. I think for us specifically, our ideas come from our shareholders, and it comes from ideas, needs, and problems that they have. So we have over 800 family farmers, and so we get a lot of feedback, right? We hear a lot of information on problems and issues that arise. And so for me specifically, training with Dr. D, you know, I came in when 174 was just kind of starting to roll into our system in the industry. And so for us, that was kind of an easy place to start. So 184 into 174, most recently into 144, and then I would say now, and what I'll talk about quite a bit today is E. coli. And so for us, you know, they tell us a problem. They tell us, I come into the barn 5 days on feed and I have 1% dead, right, with E. coli, with F18. Help us understand that problem, help us test products, help us test protocols to understand and hopefully provide data-driven recommendations to those producers and help them be competitive. And so I'm going to give 2 specific examples. Like I said, PRRS is a big one for us. So Scott might say it's more, but I found 31 successful PRRS trials that we've done as a system. Break them down into a few different ways, right? We've done a couple benchtop studies, but I think for the sake of today's conversation, I'm going to stay more in the applied research and kind of echo what Mike and Dwight had talked about. 12 feed studies, so that would be Scott's ice block, drop the bomb in the feed with PRRS, PED, and Seneca, and let that virus come into the barn through the feed bin. And then intramuscular injection. So we have done many projects where we've injected the pigs with PRRS, either via 100% inoculation or like a 10% cedar model. F18, so that's a very different story for us. I would say we've had 5 unsuccessful E. coli challenge models in the last few years, and 2 successful challenge models this year. I put the asterisk here because I think it's a super important point, and I'll talk about it more as I get into the priorities. But Pipestone shareholders, when they say we have an F18 problem, they say we have a sudden death problem. We have a mortality problem. We don't have a scour issue. Yes, scour's happening, but I'm concerned about the mortality. And so for us, if we would replicate that with the challenge model and we would measure scour scores, that's not the problem that they're dealing with, right? The problem that they're dealing with is that mortality. And so for us, we needed to replicate that. We needed to have that mortality happening so that we could test products, test protocols, and provide them tools. And so in this case, defining success by the problem is very important in our objective of challenge model. Right here, I just have a list of other successful challenge models we've completed, either within Pipestone internally or with a university or an external sponsor. And then some of these too would be like a co-infection model. We like to do that with circovirus with both 2A and 2D. take that off. Yeah. Sorry about that, guys. We'll try that again. Okay, so where do we do it? We've got 5 wean to finish research barns, 2 of which would be BSL2 certified. These would be very similar to what you've already seen presented today. 84 trial pens, so 2 rooms. And then we've got the Feed Logic system in there. Again, we've all had the same experiences with it. It's great when it works, frustrating when it doesn't, but it provides you feed data on the pen level, feed disappearance at the pen level, which is crucial. Our newest facility we've built in 2018, we call Research Barn 6. This facility is also BSL2 certified. It allows us, it has 6 small rooms, and so each room can house up to 100 nursery pigs, so then up to 600 pigs, but each room is its own separate airspace, and that's where the benefit is of that facility. The air is filtered in, and then the air is filtered out of each of those individual rooms. Gives us a lot of control over those small scale proof of concept work, and this is where all of our feed mitigation would have been conducted because of those 6 separate rooms and 6 separate feed bins. Okay, so I'm going to change gears a little bit and talk about the 5 priorities I have for challenge model execution, and then within each of those, or some of those, I have some specific examples of projects where that's proven to be important. So the first one I'm going to talk about is study design, and Mike and I didn't plan our presentations together, but I love the way he talked about that the change that we're detecting, or the change we're looking to see between genetic lines or products, is getting smaller and smaller. And I think that, when we talk about study design and we add in the extra layer of infecting pigs with the disease, there's 2 most important questions that you need to ask yourself. What's the primary objective, and then what's the expected outcome? And so when we're completing these large-scale studies, you have to balance cost, you have to balance the objective, and then the level of practicality, right? And so for us, we would love to tell you that every research study we do can be replicated in the field the next turn. But that's not always the case, right? I mean, there's times that we need to answer a question first, we need to scale up, we need to achieve a 30-40% mortality to really be able to understand the problem. And then, like Mike mentioned, that's then when you take that out into the field and replicate that and validate what you've understood or what you studied in the research barn. The other thing I think with expected outcomes that are super important, when your primary objective is mortality, you need to know what to expect from your positive control. When you're looking at 2,400 pigs and you want a 20% mortality, you need to know what that cost is going to be. I mean, that's going to be significant, and research is not cheap, right? It's an expensive cost, and when you tack on production costs and mortality costs of a group that you expected to go sell to the plant, and now you've lost 20%, those costs need to be recognized prior to going into that project. I also think once you've established those 2 questions or answered those 2 questions, what pathogen best tests that objective, or multiple? For us, we like to do Circo and PRRS together. So if we're answering a Circo question, we would like to combine Circo and PRRS in our challenge model to better understand that. And then, are you able to access a challenge model that's provided repeatable results? So whether it's published already through a university, through an external company, whatever that may be, having that resource that's proven repeatable results, I think is very important. Otherwise, you start small, right? Start small scale, conducting a pilot study, especially when you're going after something, again, with a high mortality rate. I think that's super important. But altogether, right, we're looking at smaller differences than we used to be looking at. We're adding in the extra layer of we're injecting pigs or infecting pigs with the disease. And so all in all, the statistician in me says our goal has to be to reduce variation or be aware and start to understand unknowns that may come into the study so that we're not having a poor use of those animals. The third priority I want to talk about is challenge material and challenge type. And so For us at Pipestone, when I talk about direct inoculation, cedar model, 100% inoculation models, we're both, especially with PRRS, we're very confident with both of those at this point. I would put our feed model under that of direct inoculation. And the reason I say that is when I think of natural exposure, I think of using, for example, a flow that's known for E. coli and trying to do a research trial on it. And I always tell producers, like, if you want me to fix your E. coli problem, like, let me put a research trial in there, because then there won't be E. coli, And so, that's a lot of cost. There's a lot of labor, time, and effort put into that. And so I want to make sure if we're going to study a product or a protocol, I want to have controlled that exposure to E. coli, ensured that we got those pigs sick, and not leave that up to chance. I also just have a check mark for 3 important things to think about when you're acquiring challenge material. Making sure you've got an MTA in place, the proper permits in place, and make sure the proper people are aware of that movement of material, whether it be within state or across state lines, and make sure that all those boxes are checked. And then just other things to consider that will modify that expected outcome are things like, what age will you challenge those pigs, right? Are you going to follow the commercial exposure rate of that, or are you going to give it a little younger or a little older, or should you consider vaccinating? For us, when we scale up into our large research barns and we do our PRRS challenge, we will vaccinate. And that's because we did a pilot study right before, I think it was 2014, 2015. And that was the first time we scaled up into our big research barns. And we wanted to understand if we needed to provide vaccination. Knowing we were going to go use a cedar model with 174 and infect those pigs with PRRS. And that pilot study told us we did, right? We weren't willing to take that risk of that much fallout, that much mortality. And so for us, we choose to vaccinate. And that's just something you would need to consider and understand when it comes to your expected outcomes of the project. Okay, so another priority to keep in mind when executing research studies, disease studies, is the facility that you're going to execute those projects in. And so once you've established your study design, your objectives, the next question becomes what facility type or size houses the number of pigs to answer that question. And so I think number of pigs is a huge one, but the ability to control the disease, both internally and externally, I think would be the two most important pieces. And so specifically around disease control internally and externally, when we do our PRRS studies in our big research barns, we accept that known risk that PRRS may, they may be laterally exposed or flu or, something might blow in. Like most of our wean to finish research barns aren't filtered. And so that's a risk that we take, knowing that that's our opportunity to scale up, right? And so we have to weigh that risk. RB6, though, our small BSL-2 facility, is kind of the opposite of that, right? That provides us that small level of control where we're able to keep what's in the room, and everything out. The other thing I had mentioned that we're BSL-2 certified in a couple of our big barns, and then RB6, our large facility. And so there's 4 levels of animal biosafety level certification that can be obtained. And just as that BSL increases, the risk of the agent increases, which would mean just that degree of protection needed would also increase. That can be via work practices, physical containment requirements, personnel containment requirements. There's the laundry list. For us, the reason we maintain that ABSL2 status is because of the PRRS, because we do scale up and do PRRS in our big barns. That's been an easy thing for us to maintain with that annual certification of BSL2 in those big barns. And then with the F18 E. coli, you don't need BSL2 certification. So we stay BSL1 at the other research barns. And then just for general curiosity, I put ASF in there as BSL-3. So the fourth priority I'm going to hit on here is one that, honestly, if you asked me to put this slide deck together like a year and a half ago, this wouldn't have been a priority. And I like this because I think it's similar to kind of what Dwight had talked about, where everybody's criteria or everybody's production group's a little bit different, right? And so I think at Pipestone we have this cool opportunity where we have 80 sow farms that range from in population from 3,000 to 11,000. So we have opportunities, I have opportunities when I'm trying to figure out the type of pig needed for a trial. Well, I have tons of different options. And then within those options, I have so much information about each of those facilities. And I think that that's a cool opportunity, but what that's taught us is variation amongst pig source can play a bigger role in the outcome than the actual disease that I give to those pigs at the research barn. So I think a good example of that is we've had studies we've done, we'd finished studies where we've infected those pigs with PRRS, and our goal had been general disease, right? We expected PRRS to kind of make everything else, all those opportunistic bugs to kind of come up around that post-wean or post-challenge phase. Well, that group we started with was obviously negative for PRRS, right, from the sow farm, obviously negative for flu, mycoplasma, our high health sow farm status, but also very, very low for bacterial pathogens. And so when those pigs came in, we challenged them with PRRS, and they just wouldn't die. they fought through that viral disease. They dealt with some viral pneumonia, and they just kept flowing, and they closed out at like 4.5%. And so I think, you know, we've learned there that the type of wean pig that you start with plays such a huge role in how the wean to finish performance with that exposure to PRRS, flu, you name it, how those things are going to interact. And so now we're very intentional about the type of pig we use, whether it be we want those secondaries, so we're going to go to a lower health sow farm, or we really want just a viral exposure, so then we're going to make sure we pick a really high health sow farm. Because again, that's just going to increase that unwanted or unknown variation in that project. There's other things you can consider controlling for with selection, right? Litter, age, weight, parity, dam, and we have the opportunity to dive into those sow farms and control for all those factors as much as possible. Again, you know, you've heard it twice today, but it is so true, right? It is very true. You couldn't do it without a great team. And so I think one thing I'm going to add that wasn't necessarily talked about earlier is that for our research team, and I've told many people this, but you know, there's such a spectrum of experience there, right? Like, you know, you ask everybody on my team to fix a water line in a pig barn, and they're like, okay, cool, I'll run to Baumgart's. And then you ask them to enter data into Excel in the exact form our statistician wants it, and they're like, okay, cool, got it. You know, and just like that gamut of experience and capability, I think is hard to find. And so I'm really proud of that. I think that, you know, they're willing to load fat hogs, they're willing to load and vaccinate the research pigs and boots on the ground, but also understand the value and the importance of accuracy and scale calibrations and certifications of scales and weights and all those fine-tuned details that make that data useful, right? And takes that back to our shareholders. And there's nothing that they like more than to run into a shareholder and they ask, what's going on in research, right? And our team just loves to talk about the stuff that they get to do day to day, which again is the same stuff that those shareholders are doing day to day. They're just answering questions for those shareholders. So it's a pretty cool interaction to see. Willingness to be flexible. So with that 80 sow farm option, right? That's great, but that sometimes means that those wean pigs aren't arriving in Pipestone until 8, 9 o'clock at night on a Friday night, and we still have to individually weigh 1,200 of them, right? And so I don't want to take that for granted, that they're willing to help us collect the data and help ensure it's accurate. And then electronic technology trained, right? That's happening more and more. That's not going to go away. And so just learning how to utilize that technology, have confidence in it, and then just make sure our team, understands when we're beta testing technology versus using it to collect data for a trial. I think that's an important piece to separate, because if we're collecting data on a product, we want to ensure that data is collected accurately. The other thing I'll mention is just GCP training, so good clinical practice training. My whole team is not GCP trained, but I would say enough are that there's been, it's kind of like, rolled down to the rest of the team. Just the useful data collection forms, how we correct errors, how we report things, right? Like all of that has just rolled into the team, and it's created an environment that limits errors and is accountable and accurate recording. And the last thing, probably the most important thing, right, is we have our own internal iCook at Pipestone. We developed that in 2018, and that's a huge part of holding us accountable, ensuring that we're using the right number of pigs for the projects we're answering, and those questions are valid. So I kind of hit on the top 3 objectives for today, why we invest in challenge models. Hopefully I shared some experiences that we would have with multiple challenge models, sharing our priorities when executing these models. And then just the last slide I have is the future of applied disease research, I guess as I see it. And so specifically at Pipestone Research, I talked quite a bit about E. coli, but it's real. It's real for our producers, and just starting wean pigs in general. The complications around it is real for our producers. A lot of them are just starting to take beans out. They're busy. They want a solid wean pig. And so, we feel responsible for helping them combat complications that would come with starting wean pigs, and scaling up our E. coli challenge model is one of those. For the industry, I think I already said, talked about technology, but again, it's not going away. And so I think as all these tools become more and more relevant to us, right? Early detection tools, injectable alternatives, weight estimation cameras, piglet activity cameras, right? All of these tools are going to be great, but somebody's going to have to test them, and we're going to want to validate them with, I think, disease models, right? PRRS models and E. coli models and influenza models are going to help us understand the value of these products specifically for us. That's what I have. Any questions?
Thanks a lot, Erin. Very nice job. You've got such a good story to tell where you've got these questions from shareholders and you can answer them quickly. And not easy questions to answer either. So thank you for sharing that. We do have time for a couple questions. I know we're getting towards the end here. So any questions out there?
Thank you very much for your presentation. I want to know where is the financing resource to support your trial?
Yeah, that's a great question. Where is the financial resources to do these trials?
Yeah.
Great question. So we would work with sponsors. So at Pipestone Research, we've got a contract research arm, but my role and everything I talked about today would be more on our internal Pipestone applied research arm. And so we would work with a sponsor, whether it be a genetic company, a pharmaceutical company, even Pipestone itself. So our veterinary team or our management team could also be a co-sponsor.
Thank you. Do you have any idea that your main financing resource is come from Pipestone or it's from your sponsors?
I do, yep.
So it's mainly come from Pipestone?
I would say our goal would be to work with a sponsor and then Pipestone supplement that as needed.
Okay, and is this research center for Pipestone is self-funded, or you can also earn some profit from the trial for your department?
Yeah, so if I understood you correctly, so we wouldn't profit from the research necessarily. We would find value in the results. And so at Pipestone, with our management and vet services team, we wouldn't decide to do a study if we weren't going to find value in the intellectual property of those results. And so very similar to the IDEA filter, we would do something similar with our with the senior management team at Pipestone, and they would provide us the priorities of the system.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for the presentation. I just want to know more about the GCP task or the people involved in. Do you have specific individuals whom you have already trained over some time and you could actually be able to continuously use them in trials? Or perhaps you can go to a farm and maybe recruit individuals there depending on need basis, and thereafter train them to accept the GCP, the principle or something, and then use them later into the research. Thank you.
Yeah, great question. So for the GCP training, so if we're doing work in a sow farm, we're going to utilize the staff in the sow farm to execute that. And that's largely just a biosecurity thing. Work is wean to finish, and so I'd like to keep my team out of that. And so we typically would send one PAR research team member into the sow farm who is GCP trained to train the staff at the sow farm to help execute that. If it's wean to finish, our whole team would do it, and we would execute that and be GCP trained.
All right, one more quick question. Yep, that'll be our last one there.
Thank you, very good presentation. I'm wondering if you're collaborating much with your nutrition team, because it seems like a big opportunity area to try to figure out what the actual requirements are for sick animals sometimes, because, you know, that's an area we struggle in. And so just wondering if you see the future, you know, greater collaboration among scientists in the community of swine, in the swine industry.
Yeah, great question. I would say, yeah. I mean, we have our research committee team, and that would cover all facets of our research world. So that would cover our contract world, our wean to finish world, our sow farm world, and our nutrition world. And so we prioritize things together, and we only have a limited amount of research barns and labor, and so that's a key part of prioritizing how we get pigs started on feed.
Thanks, Erin. Let's give Erin one more round of applause.